when we're talking about reasonable care, it's a broad definition. There's no black and white answer here. Like I said earlier, it's really just kind of a matter of, did you really try and make sure you were compliant here? If your broker advised you that maybe you were using the wrong tariff, did you heed their advice? Did you dig into that tariff anymore? Do you have emails back and forth explaining why you believe your tariff is correct? You know, having documentation to back up, yes, Customs disagreed with this, but I really believed, based on this factor and this factor, that we were truly correct. So it really depends on the facts and circumstances of every individual case. Something else to consider, the fines and penalties for not exercising reasonable care. Those are going to scale with the size of you as an importer. So if you are, you know, let's say Apple, and you are obviously not exercising reasonable care when you're classifying iPhones, very unlikely that they get something that big of a deal, but let's say they were misclassifying iPhones as watches in order to save money on duties and taxes because watches might be taxed less. The fact that Apple is a multi-billion-dollar corporation with the resources to have lawyers on staff constantly to make sure that they are doing everything correctly means that they're going to get hit harder if they are found to not be exercising reasonable care, more so than a mom and pop shop who just finds a better source for the screws that they buy, and they just want to make sure that they're doing right. So there's definitely a measure of how capable were you of really making sure that you did this correctly in terms of assessing any duties or fines and penalties. The top 5 things that we always tell people to watch out for is valuation. Valuation means basically how much did you actually pay for these goods. If you are purchasing from someone overseas, it is not okay for them to say, you pay me $300,000 for this, but I'm only going to put $250,000 on the invoice because then you pay duties and taxes on $50,000 less of value. That is illegal. That is fraud. You cannot do that. Your invoice has to reflect what you paid. If you are being provided something free of charge, you do still have to show the value, the fair market value of that item as if you are paying for it, because you do still have to pay duties and taxes on that item. The next one is classification. Obviously, if you've ever seen a classification, the physical paper copy of the HTS, it is a book that is about 8 inches thick. And within that book is a classification for just about every item known to man, whether it's specific or whether it's broad. There is a tariff for everything in Customs eyes. And if you are using the incorrect one, especially if you're advised of that, you can be subject to fines and penalties. So make sure you are classifying your items correctly. Also, you need to make sure that you're classifying items correctly for your benefit, because you might be paying 10% duty because you think that the items that you're importing fall under one tariff, and maybe your broker finds a better tariff that's actually more specific, and more specific is better in tariffs, and you could save an extra 6% in duty just because you actually took the extra time to classify your goods correctly.
Caleb, a couple questions on the classification. As an importer, where can I go to get help to classify my goods? And to go beyond that, what can I do with CBP to ensure that I get to keep that classification number for a certain duration of time?
Absolutely. So there are actually several options here. If you want to do the legwork yourself, which we always encourage importers to be educated and know how to classify products, we're actually doing another webinar separately about how to classify things. I'll just do a little plug there. We will be doing one that gives you a snapshot on how to classify, but it is a complex process. So, you know, people do come to us for help on that pretty regularly, and we understand that. We do have a consulting division that helps people with that. Depending on, you know, how much work we put in, there may be some fees associated with that, but we we like to make sure the importers are educated. So if you're going to do the legwork yourself, there's 2 resources that I suggest. And Kim, perhaps we can send a link out in any follow-up emails of this. The first one is basically just an online version of that HTS, that 8-inch thick book of classifications. If you know about what your product would be called in customs terminology, you can literally search that online and maybe your item will come up.
You could just Google HTS US current, and it should bring up the most current HTS there is.
That is correct. So you can actually pull up a searchable version of that. And that will pull up something where you can just type the word in. And if that word is in the HTS, it's going to drop down to it. Now, like I said, it's a big book, so you might not find what you're looking for immediately. If you're having trouble finding something just on the searchable US HTS, there's another resource I would encourage you to look at called CROSS. I believe it's Customs Ruling Online Search System is the acronym.
Yeah, and I think you can also just Google CBP rulings, and that should pull up as well.
Yes. So basically what that is a database of people who have applied for what's called a binding ruling. And this is the other thing that Kim was kind of referring to with one of her questions. If you have a tariff that you believe is better than what you've been using to classify, and you want to double check with CBP, you want to get CBP to agree with you, you can have either you can put this together yourself, or you can work with a broker to put it together for you. You can put together what's called a binding ruling, and that is pretty much what it sounds like. You make a case that says, I have item X. Item X is described as this. As of now, we are classifying item X under tariff 1234. However, using the general rules of interpretation, we believe that it would be better classified as 4567. Customs, do you agree? If Customs agrees with your case, you can actually use that as a precedent to say, going forward, this item is classified as 4567, and that is a permanent thing. And then also other people who are bringing in the same item can not necessarily use it with the same level of authority, but it does set a precedent for other people. So the purpose of that cross online ruling system is for you as an importer to say, I am bringing in item X as well. I'm going to search for item X in this database and see if anybody has filed a binding ruling on it, because that can just tell you, let's say you're importing rubber ducks. If you search rubber ducks on Cross, I am sure that there is a binding ruling on rubber ducks, and you can say, oh, well, here's what Customs believes the tariff should be for these rubber ducks, and also it's backed up with their reasoning for why it should be this tariff. So
who's
those
ultimately, sorry to interrupt, who's ultimately responsible for the classification? Is it the broker or is it the importer?
It is the importer. And this is, something that we have conversations with importers on a regular basis, because if you are a novice importer, obviously you are not very well educated on tariffs most of the time. So while we understand that in your line of logic, it may be better for the broker to be responsible, this goes back to reasonable care. This is Customs saying, you need to be able to adequately confirm the information that you're bringing into the country. So if you are not qualified to be classifying the goods that you're bringing in, either you need to pay somebody to do that, or maybe you should not be importing, is Customs' idea. Basically, they believe that if you can't do that adequately, you are not qualified to be an importer, which is why they put that impetus of classification on the importer. And Scarborough will obviously help you out as much as we can, but at the end of the day, even if we suggest a tariff, you still need to confirm that tariff and that you agree with it, because you, at the end of the day, are the person as the importer that's going to receive a notice from Customs saying, hey, I think this is classified wrong. I think you owe us more duty. So that's just something to be aware of for sure. Our next compliance issue is quantity. if you have discrepancies in terms of how many of an item are in a container versus how much is reported on your commercial invoice, and customs examines that, you're going to have to report that information differently. There are certain tariffs that have what is called a statistical quantity, and if the statistical quantity on that is NO for number, you need to adequately provide customs with the number of that item that you're importing. Otherwise, you are not exercising reasonable care again. Country of origin is a really, really big one, especially right now. And I cannot stress enough that the country that you export the goods from is not necessarily the country of origin for the goods. Country of origin means the country where those goods were manufactured. There are several different interpretations of country of origin, but at the end of the day, it's about where those goods were manufactured. So if you are bringing something in and it is made in China, then you are potentially subject to Section 301 duties, and you need to be aware of that. And then the final thing that we see pretty often is record keeping. So often we have importers who come to us, and they, if they're a new client, oftentimes we ask them, well, can you send us an entry packet so that we can see how your goods are filed? And they don't have that. Record keeping, you are, as the importer, actually supposed to maintain records of all of your imports for a minimum of 5 years after they import into the US. And if you are not keeping those yourself, first of all, you need to start. That is something you absolutely have to start doing, because if you, let's say your broker, heaven forbid, goes under and you can't actually use them anymore and you have to find a new broker, you could actually get yourself into some trouble because you don't know what to classify your goods as. You don't have any idea how to bring these into the country, and you can't tell your new broker how either because you don't have any entry packets. So if you don't have them yourself, ask your broker for them. They should absolutely be able to provide them.
So if an importer signs up for an ACE portal, will all of that record keeping just sit in that portal?
Yes, it will.
Excellent.
This is just a quick list of things to watch out for because they can either cause issues or they're just something to be aware of. Ball bearings, we just always toss this out there because they're subject to anti-dumping so often. Anti-dumping is basically something that is made overseas at such a cheap value that it's literally dumped into the US and it cheapens the US market. Things on that, things that are subject to anti-dumping pay exorbitant amounts of duty to discourage people from bringing them into the country. Customs value, we talked about that just now, about making sure that you're reporting the correct value on your goods. Drawback is more of a broad topic, but we always like to plug it. If you're bringing goods into the country and then exporting them immediately, or let's say they're here for a year, you don't sell them, and then you find a buyer overseas and you export them back out of the country, you are eligible for drawback on that most likely, and you can get most of the duties and taxes back that you paid on those items. Reasonable care is just something that we always encourage you to exercise. Make sure that you're communicating with your broker, that you understand why they're classifying things the way they are, and that you agree with their classification and you're making record of that. Record keeping, make sure that you're keeping those for 5 years. I would encourage you to just keep the whole entry packet together in whatever filing system you use, and keep as many documents on those shipments as possible. Rules of origin, especially with things with USMCA and stuff like that going on right now, you need to understand the scope of what country of origin means to individual countries, individual trade agreements, things like that. And then tariff classification, please, please, please work closely with your broker and make sure that you are in agreement for the best classification to use on your items so that you are not getting in trouble with customs for misrepresenting your products.